Hello, and welcome to the third section of this course. The section is called ProviderHosted Addins. We will learn how to start building the ProviderHosted Addins using the Visual Studio development environment. We will also learn how to build code that interacts with SharePoint from the add-in web application, so either reads or writes to the data in the SharePoint. Also, we will learn how certain SharePoint-hosted add-ins can be transformed into provider-hosted ones. And lastly, we will learn some of the additional capabilities that provider-hosted add-ins have over SharePoint-hosted add-ins. And this video is called Provisioning Provider-Hosted Add-in. In this video, we will learn how developers will create provider-hosted add-in and connect it to SharePoint Online. We will also learn how we can enable our provider-hosted add-in to inherit or reflect the styling that the parent web has. Let us start by providing a provider-hosted add-in definition. Such add-ins are characterized to be external to SharePoint, meaning that they have components hosted outside of SharePoint farm. Usually, we have two or more main components: a bare-bones add-in project, which at most will define the permissions that our add-in must request from the SharePoint. That will be deployed to target SharePoint web. And then we have a web application which will be hosted externally, either in the cloud or in the local computer, which will contain all of the add-in logic. Users who access add-in from SharePoint web will get redirected to a page in the external application, thus starting the interaction between them and the app. A few words on the provider-hosted add-in flexibility. Developers are not limited to the default .NET platform when developing provider-hosted add-ins, which means developers might choose to code in an entirely different language, for example PHP. There are no bounds on how the user interface should look like. It can be completely different from traditional SharePoint user interface, or developers can choose to mirror the styles from the host web by dynamically referencing them. If data storage is required, developers are not limited to lists and libraries in the host web, and can use local or cloud-based external components like SQL tables in database. A few words about provider-hosted add-ins Authentication Flow. There is a third-party trusted authority. In the SharePoint Online case, it's the Azure Access Control Service, which acts like a mediator between the browser, the SharePoint server, and our location where our provider-hosted add-in is hosted. So, the first step is user launches an add-in from SharePoint. Step 2. SharePoint requests the context token from our trusted service. Step 3. SharePoint receives the signed token. Step 4. SharePoint redirects browser to the add-in page, also providing the token in the request. Step 5. Browser requests the page, including this signed token. Step 6. The add-in gets the request and asks for attached token validation. Step 7. Trusted Security Service validates the token. Step 8. If necessary, add-in will perform interactions with SharePoint, including the signed token with requests. In step 9, SharePoint validates the token and responds. In step 10, finally the add-in page gets rendered in the browser. Now let us take a look at the demo, and we will cover how to create a default provider-hosted add-in in Visual Studio. We will connect it to SharePoint Online, and then we will make it inherit branding from the parent SharePoint Web. Let us get started. First of all, let us go to the New Project and select SharePoint Add-in. In this box, we must connect to an existing SharePoint Online site collection and choose the provided hosted type. You will be asked to connect with the username and password to the set site collection. Perform the sign-in, choose the SharePoint Online option, click Next. You are free to select either the Web Forms or MVC web application, and in the next window we just leave the Windows Azure Access Control Service, the default selection, intact. After the solution has loaded, we will be presented with the default.spx markup page. It is a page which contains a code behind in C# language. We also have the jQuery files here, and we should be referencing them in our pages, so somewhere here. Let's take a look at the code of this file. The page-pre-init method contains a default code which handles the redirection and display of this page, and the main logic is happening in the page_load method. We are getting the current SharePoint context by calling the SharePoint context provider current get SharePoint context method, and then we are using that object to create actually the client context object here, which is a disposable object. That's why it's enclosed in the using statement. Then we are using the SharePoint client-side object model API to load the web and web property title. We are executing the query. It is synchronous in this case, and then we're just spitting out the context.web.title property. When we run this add-in, firstly it will ask us to trust it, and then it will show the white page with the title of the host web. Let us take a look at a slightly modified version of this default provider-hosted add-in. I have added a ASP literal object here. In the code behind, I am outputting everything in the object, as opposed to using response.write. So that object gets populated with not only the current web title, but also with the string welcome and then the current user title. Let us run this code. You'll see that this is the initial request to our SharePoint Online, and that page redirects us to a locally hosted web application. And here we have it, the title of our host web plus the string welcome and then our username. Let us go back to the code and enhance it a bit. I want my application to inherit the styling information from the host web. Firstly, let us include the reference to the jQuery, using the jQuery file which is in our solution, or using the content delivery network, it's up to you. And then in the second script block, we wait until the document is ready and then execute our code. First, we need to get the value of query string parameter sp host URL. Then we use that to construct a full URL to the file sp.ui.controls.js, which we then load with this function here. When this is done, our page will automatically inherit the controls and styles from our host web. The only thing left to do is add a small div container in the body of our page, which this script will use to populate with necessary data. This is the highlighted div element. It has the ID of Chrome_control_container. Then data ms_control attribute has the value of sp.ui.controls.navigation, and then inside the data-ms-options we are setting the JSON object that will describe the behavior of our Chrome control. We can set the things like what page will load when the user clicks on the little question mark icon. We can also set the logo of our page. We can also set the title of our page here, and also provide some utility links which will be accessed by clicking on the gear icon at the top right section of the screen. Let us build the application and see how this looks. So you see it looks a little bit more presentable right now. It has an icon, it has a Chrome control, which is the thing you see at the top of the page. It also has back to the side, which will take us to host web in SharePoint. We have the title here, and we have several demo links here. So in a nutshell, this is the structure and contents of ProviderHosted Addin.